here I have a Commodore 64 Ultimate Starlight Edition. Let's take a look. Look at that. Oh, such a nice box. Retro gaming, modern power. Commodore 64. Oh, it's a nice box. So authentic to the original. Let's get inside. Try and get into the box without ripping it, which seems like... No, this box is very easy to rip. Welcome back to the world of friendly computing. That was a letter. It says Commodore for a generation, but is now... Yeah, okay. We'll read that later. A little bit of cardboard. Oh, and there it is. The Starlight Edition Commodore. Goodness me, that looks quite cool. This is the brand new Commodore 64 Ultimate Starlight Edition from the recently resurrected Commodore International Corporation. Now, lots of you have been asking me to update my Commodore brand heist documentary looking into the ownership of the brand and those frisky looking machines from a few years back. I'll admit a lot has happened since then, which I'll touch on in this video, but safe to say the machines or companies featured in that video are not the ones here. I'm presuming you know the basics, and look, I was as upset as anyone when I learned the person who starts their videos with "Hello Chip Dippers" was going to be heading up this operation.
Kidding.
But the naysayers are likely the same old folks, the ones who get upset about anyone stepping outside of their box, especially a YouTuber. Ugh, disgusting! But point is, I'm going to focus on the hardware here. This isn't a C64 edition of This Is Your Life, and frankly, from what I've seen so far, Christian and the rest of the team appear to be doing a fabulous job. I should also point out that I didn't actually have any intention of buying this or even requesting a review model. I was simply emailed out of the blue by Jim Squires, the new Commodore's Director of Communications, and asked if I wanted one, to which I said sure, why not? And that's what I have here. A 3D visualization of this has been on Commodore.net for a while. They basically ran their own self-contained Kickstarter campaign to fund these systems, although the hardware was already out there. We'll touch on that later as well. But for the most part, this does resemble their 3D visualization. I'm a huge fan of translucent plastic, especially if it's glowing, and this ticks both of those boxes. Talking of boxes, you can see what they're going for here. Screw you, modern world. This is a Commodore 64, and we're going to lob the odd joke on the cover about it too. No humans included. Thank Christ. Inside the box you'll find a letter, a warped piece of cardboard, the computer, the manual glued to the box, and another box filled with goodies, an HDMI cable, a set of stickers, the very second, and a power adapter. Initial impressions are, well, it's not the ZX Spectrum next level of quality. The stickers are bubbling a bit, the keyboard is a little bendy, and there's a clear lack of lock on the shift lock key. Original owners will know exactly what I mean, but it feels fairly robust and has a nice arsenal of ports. Where the user port usually resides, we have HDMI, 2 USB-A connectors and a 100 megabit Ethernet connection, 12 volt DC power on the side, an audio out and all the other usual connectors we'd see on a 64 on the back, cartridge slot, dataset port, disk drive port and 2 DB9 joystick connectors again on the side. For video we have the usual 8-pin DIN that supports CVBS, S-Video or RGB, and instead of our RF out, we have a handy HDMI port that displays 1080 in the 16:9 aspect ratio. That's great for most people, however it's not ideal if you've got a Checkmate LCD monitor like me that you are hoping to pair this with. Still, let's give it a go and see what the mustard is. Well, look at that. What I read was wrong. This thing boots up straight into a picture-perfect 4:3 aspect ratio, even through HDMI, and what's more, it seems to function just like a Commodore 64 should. Now, I'm going to take a moment to just express how absolutely stunning this Starlight Edition looks. I know this isn't going to be everyone's taste, and there's definitely a case for the understated beige of old, but I just love how this looks on my desk, especially with that Checkmate monitor. I sat here for a good 30 minutes, just in awe, and when a computer does that, well, you know you've got something special. Either that or I've got ADHD, probably both. Now, the Ultimate boots directly into Commodore Basic just like the original machine, but the power button holds a secret or two. This is actually a rocker switch. Hold it down for 4 seconds and the machine will turn off. Click it upwards and we get the Ultimate menu system, and god damn, there's a lot in here. And that's where the manual will come in handy. Now, this isn't some half-assed book thrown together. There's a quick start, setting up, guide to the file browser, getting started, basic programming tutorial, as well as chapters looking into the more advanced functions. Although if you want to understand them better, nothing beats having a play around yourself. The disk file browser gives you access to the micro SD card that can be inserted onto the main board, flash memory where you can for instance load a cartridge ROM, a RAM disk, and USB. And that's where the very second comes in handy. Pop that into a USB port, or any USB stick really, formatted to FAT32 or exFAT, and you can navigate through the entire file system, either using the C64's standard 2 cursor keys with Shift to alternate, or thankfully, WASD. From here you can load any disk, cartridge image or .tap image for tapes. You can also run .prg files or explore T64 files, and even load .sid music files to the built-in music player. We also get our standard file operations: rename, delete, copy, create directory. What's more, if you do load anything, we get little disk drive sounds emanating from the unit itself, not from the TV, which is an important distinction. We don't want those sounds ruining and mixing in with the wondrous SID chip. You can also turn them off if they annoy you. Lovely stuff. Honestly, I don't know what else you really need. But this is a review, so I can't just sit here and play The Way of the Exploding Fist. Ugh. Yes, now we're at the important stuff. Wait, I've skipped ahead. Back to Way of the Exploding Fist. Here's what it looks like through a capture card. Pixel perfect. You can keep those scan lines, or you can turn them off. That's one of the games bundled on the stick. You also get quite a few other NTSC and PAL games which you can read on screen yourself, along with a wealth of demos and some BBS software which, once you're connected to Wi-Fi, allows you to pseudo-connect to these services now available through the internet. The box really wasn't lying. One of the included demos is appropriately the Commodore Christmas demo, but there's also a brand new version if you want to relive Christmas 1984 by experiencing a fresh demo for the first time. Oh, and in the music directory is a rhythm game called Goat Beat, which we'll come back to later on. It's a good test for input lag. I should also point out that you get a copy of 2 GUIs, the all-famous GEOS along with GUI 64. We'll come back to GEOS as we navigate the other menu options. It's useful for showing off a few things. This next menu item is pretty interesting. CommoServe File Search. For that we'll need to connect this thing to Wi-Fi, but that's easily done. Now this is a service hosted by Commodore that allows you to search and download various images. If I set the category as games, you can see all the games held there currently, and if you choose to run one, it'll download the flash memory and run it from there. Pretty neat. I'm going to hammer through the other menus as efficiently as I can. Memory and ROMs gives us control over the machine's ROMs, as well as turning on a virtual RAM expansion unit and designating some memory to it. You can set the ROMs for the disk drives here too. Turbo Boost, always a welcome option when you're playing something that runs slow at the standard 1 MHz clock speed, like Street Fighter 2. The options here allow you to go up to a whopping 64 MHz, which is reflected instantly on any program you're running. Video setup is pretty useful as it allows you to change the HDMI output to full HD if you are using a widescreen. Don't worry, it won't stretch the screen. You can also swap between the various PAL and NTSC modes. I warn you though, setting a high resolution, especially the 1280 by 1024 PC mode, gives you some damn crisp visuals. Good lord. Most of the screen grabs I'll be showing you in this video are in PAL 576p, but it's nice to have the other options depending on your screen type. This is also where you can set the analog video output to RGB if you've got an appropriate cable and screen. Audio setup gives you a wealth of sound options, very important for any SID fanatic. Honestly, there's a lot here. Joystick and controllers allows you to set WASD as a virtual joystick, which is quite handy, especially if you're running GEOS without a mouse. As you can see with this fancy artwork I created in GEOS Paint. LED lighting allows you to do fancy stuff with the case lighting and the keyboard lighting independently of each other. I prefer the default setup, but if you want your keyboard lights to bounce to the beat of the SID chip, well, you can do that here. The wealth of options here is actually pretty incredible. I mean, you can set up your 64 as an FTP file server and transfer files across your network. We've got virtual modems and virtual printers, which will save anything you create to a PNG file rather than having to connect an actual dot matrix printer. GEOS is a little bit fiddly with printer drivers being on the correct disk, so you need to deal with that. But once you've sorted it, then you can expect printouts like this. Which is actually exactly what you could expect when printing anything back in the 80s and 90s. A load of garbled nonsense. So that's working perfectly. Seriously though, I'm sure through tweaking here and there you can get something competent to print out. You can tweak the user interface through this menu, and you can also enable or disable the two virtual disk drives and set them as either 1541, 71 or 81 depending on your disk drive preference. Wonderful stuff. There's enough here to keep the keenest of option tweakers busy until the early hours of Boxing Day. But enough of that, enough of the virtual world. I want to test some actual Commodore 64 games and devices with this thing. Starting with this, Boxy Moxy, a cartridge game released by RGCD and written by Antonio Savona and Pirates of Zanzibar. Turning the C64 Ultimate on with a cartridge inserted boots straight to the cart, just like it should. I'll also need a joystick, so this kills two birds with one stone. And yeah, I've never played this game before, but what we seem to have here is a puzzle game where we need to line our people up in order to flatten these skulls. Pretty decent, and it also seems to be working as it should. Next up, I wanted to try Mouse Cheese. This is a package I reviewed years ago, but comes with a mouse, hence the mouse, and a program for you to draw with using the mouse. That's the cheese, apparently. This version is on 5¼ inch floppy, which meant connecting up my 15412 disk drive. Now it turns out that if you don't turn off your virtual disk drive, then the C64 will attempt to read from both the virtual drive and the real drive. Well, that's what seemed to be happening.
It's loading from that, but it's also doing the disk sounds from the computer.
From the manual, I was expecting the physical drive to fall in line and become the second disk drive, as the second virtual drive was disabled. But that's fine, I just disabled the first virtual drive and stopped hearing virtual disk drive sound effects. The next problem was, my disk drive didn't seem to be working too well with any disk. Which brings us onto the problem with aging technology. It's old, it breaks, and paired with this shiny new 64 Ultimate, it's annoying. But at least it proves that the Ultimate can interface with the disk drive. And it's okay, we can just hook up a tape deck and try something else. But then, I'm instantly reminded that this isn't plain sailing either. It's not just the hardware which is getting old, so is the software, and some cassettes just won't load anymore. Aliens tried its best, but no cigar. But it is a nice touch that the tape sound comes out of the built-in speaker. Makes it feel more like a ZX Spectrum than a C64. Thankfully, Fun School 3 loaded just fine, probably because it's never been used in its entire life. And we're treated to the wonderful sound of flowing water in Build a Bridge. No shit, that white noise is genuinely the sound that plays constantly I even had to boot up my Commodore 64G to check that it was working properly. Yep, that's the sound effect. This isn't a fault on the 64 Ultimate. That's just the game. The thing is, thankfully I don't really need to sit here testing different games and tapes, because I trust this machine to load pretty much whatever is thrown at it, and that's because the underlying hardware and firmware have history. This isn't just a money grab thrown together into a crappy little package. Nor is it a Commodore 64 Mini or Maxi. And I'm not being derogatory about those systems, they have their place and they get the nostalgia job done quickly and simply. But what Commodore International have done is pull together different people, different groups and different parts of the more invested and more experienced community into one commercial system that can be purchased by, well, whoever wants one. And just like the ZX Spectrum Next and the Mega 65, that opens up the floor for people to come in and develop both software and peripherals for a system in a way that just isn't really possible these days, and that's what makes this so cool. However, unlike the ZX Spectrum Next and Mega 65, this isn't a new platform. This isn't a successor to the 64. This machine is much more rooted in the preservation camp. Essentially, it's a Commodore 64 brought into 2025, and that is mainly due to the underlying hardware. One difference between this and the original is that we don't have a warranty void sticker on the screw hole, so I can safely open it up with just these 3 screws at the front and pivot it backwards to unclip the rear. Inside you can see it's built around a modern FPGA board, right there. That recreates the original hardware rather than using software emulation. At its core is an AMD Xilinx RTX 7 FPGA running cycle-accurate recreations of the 6510 CPU, VIC-2 graphics, SID audio and system logic. This platform is derived from the Ultimate 64 Elite 2 designed by Dutch engineer Gideon Zwitzer. Gideon also developed the firmware that makes the system usable day to day, including integrated disk drive emulation, cartridge, RAU support, networking features, and the on-screen menu system used to load software and configure the machine. This layer adds that modern convenience without affecting the original timing and behavior. One significant difference between this setup and the original though is the lack of user port on the back, which has made way for modern ports. But you can connect an extension to this socket here, allowing you to trail a wire outside the case to use your user port accessories if you so wish. The microSD card socket is just to the left of that, which gives the Commodore 64 abilities akin to an internal hard drive. You might notice that this board also has 2 SID sockets. This allows SID aficionados to bypass the FPGA SID core and mix it with genuine MOS chips for that authentic analog behavior. Having 2 sockets allows installation of SID chips at different addresses, and mixing, for example, an 8580 and a 6581 chip. It's a real nice touch. Another nice touch are the designer and engineer signatures on the motherboard. But as I was saying earlier, the finished system brings together wider community work as well. The newly manufactured keyboard is based on a modern C64 compatible mechanical design by Jim Drew, adapted from his Mechboard 64 and Blingboard 64 projects. And yes, I moaned about the shift lock key earlier, but compared to the keyboard on my C64G, it does feel a lot nicer. It's like if you combined a C64 keyboard with the tactile feedback of a modern soft-switched mechanical keyboard. It's really quite nice. You may note that mine has the graphics symbols on the keycaps, copying the style of the latter Commodore 64C models, whilst the Ultimate places them on the front, just like the original machines. I did notice in a few forums that people were complaining that Commodore had kept the original cursor keys, which is fair because they are an absolute ball ache to use, but it was definitely the right choice in keeping the original design. Plus, I tried plugging in an external keyboard, and yes, it works fine, so if you do want the ease of use of your conventional layout, well, you can do that quite easily. It's obvious throughout that this project has mostly been a labour of love and has had additional contributors help test compatibility and refine the hardware and firmware. So rather than a ground-up reinvention, the C64 Ultimate is best understood as years of community-driven engineering brought together into one official machine, which means that it should be able to handle any C64 peripheral, including the very best. Come on, this is what you really wanted to know. Does the Ultimate work with the Commodore Music Maker? Well, given the case is the exact same size and design, then as you'd expect, it slips on top very nicely. The Music Maker software can be loaded from cassette, and then oh yes, we are in musical bliss. Who needs 2 SID chips when you can have this at your disposal? Which I guess brings me on to my final test for this machine, plugging it into an actual CRT through the analog video out. Thankfully I have a Commodore 1701 video monitor and I have a composite cable that I connect it with. Voila! There you go. Rather neatly, you can run both the analog video out and HDMI concurrently, which not only makes you feel like a dystopian tech god, but also allows us to see the lag, if any, from that HDMI port. All we need is a suitable screen transition and to slow the frame rate. Now this video is running at 30 frames per second, and we can see that the CRT is about 2 to 3 frames ahead of the Checkmate monitor, so about 1/10 of a second. Now that's barely perceivable, but if you're a frame rate perfectionist then it could make the difference. Also, that lag is going to be different depending on what monitor you're using. Any LCD screen is going to have a small degree of lag compared to a CRT, but I can't imagine it's going to get into the way of your everyday activities. It's certainly a lot less than you'd get on an emulated system. And to prove it, I can run the included GOAT rhythm game, and even with the sound coming from both displays, they sound completely in sync. Plus, the composite on this thing looks absolutely phenomenal. It's easy to see on the Checkmate monitor. If I hook up my 64G via composite, this is what we see. A bit washed out and some banding, not ideal. Plug the same lead into the Ultimate and, I mean, it looks almost like an RGB signal. Pretty impressive stuff. So my only real gripes remain that the main sticker keeps lifting off, shift lock doesn't lock, and the disk drives didn't completely work as I expected them to. But the good vastly outweighs any of these minor niggles, and the keyboard is so good in use that my earlier concerns just don't really come into play. So there we are. That's the Commodore 64 Ultimate. Pretty good, and still available for purchase, if you should want one. So is it the future we were promised? Well, the Commodore 65 was supposed to be the successor to the 64, so really the Mega 65 is the future we were promised. And the future I was promised involved realistic virtual reality and robot servants. But the 64 Ultimate does a pretty good job at bringing the 64 into the modern day world. And that's a good thing, because old stuff is dying. It doesn't work, it breaks, and although the physicality of it is nice, there's something reassuring and complete about what they've done here. You can turn it on, load in a disk file, and you're good to go. And that's what we really want, right? We want to connect to the past, and we want to do it in a nostalgic, fast, friendly, easy to use way, and that does everything and looks good in the process. So, you know, I think it fits in well with these machines, and I think they've done a pretty damn good job at what they set out to do. I'm pretty impressed. Until next time, I've been Nostalgia Nerd. Toodaloo. I'm sure I missed testing lots of things on this machine, so if there's anything you want to see, let me know and maybe I can make a short about it or something. because shorts can be used for good as well. They're not all bad. Yes.